It's not snowing. There's no storm outside. No dramatic wind tearing through trees. No frozen wilderness. Just a quiet room. 16 degrees Celsius. That's about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't sound dangerous, does it? You've felt colder. You've walked through British winter mornings that bite harder than this. You've stood on a train platform in January and thought, this is fine. But here's the question no one asks. How cold does a room have to be before your body quietly begins to lose? Because survival doesn't always look like disaster. Sometimes it looks like silence. Picture this. An old stone cottage somewhere in the British countryside. Thick walls, small windows, the kind that hold history and cold. The thermostat reads 16 degrees Celsius. That's about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't sound dangerous, does it? You've felt colder. You've walked through British winter mornings that bite harder than this. You've stood on a train platform in January and thought this is fine. But here's the question no one asks. How cold does a room have to be before your body quietly begins to lose? Because survival doesn't always look like disaster. Sometimes it looks like silence. Picture this. An old stone cottage somewhere in the British countryside. Thick walls, small windows, the kind that hold history and cold. The thermostat reads 16 degrees Celsius. Not freezing, not dramatic, just cool. You sit down. You're not wet. You're not starving. You're not in immediate danger. At least that's what you think. Your body, however, has one non-negotiable rule. It must stay close to 37 degrees Celsius internally. That's your core temperature. Your brain depends on it. Your heart depends on it. Every enzyme, every electrical signal in your nervous system depends on that narrow range. Drop just 2 degrees and your system starts to strain. Drop below 35 degrees Celsius, and medicine has a name for it. Hypothermia. And hypothermia does not require snow. It requires heat loss. Here's the science most people underestimate. Your body is constantly producing heat through metabolism, through muscle activity, even at rest. But at the same time, your body is constantly losing heat through radiation, through convection, through conduction, especially into cold stone floors or walls, and through evaporation, even invisible moisture from your skin. At 16 degrees Celsius, the temperature gap between your core and the room is over 20 degrees. Heat always flows from warm to cold. Always. And your body is the warm object in that equation. At first, nothing dramatic happens. You might feel a slight chill. Maybe you rub your hands together. Your blood vessels in the skin begin to constrict. That's vasoconstriction, your body's first defensive move. It pulls warm blood away from your fingers and toes to protect your vital organs. You don't notice the calculation happening inside you, but your body does. It is already rationing heat. Minutes pass. If you remain still, your muscles produce less heat. If the air in the room is slightly damp, and British winters often are, heat leaves you faster. Stone absorbs heat efficiently. Cold air circulates slowly across your skin. Nothing dramatic. No alarm bells. Just gradual loss. And gradual loss is the most dangerous kind. Now imagine this room over hours. You're reading, working, resting. Your metabolic heat production at rest is limited, roughly 70 to 100 watts for an average adult. That sounds technical, but here's what it means. You are a small biological heater in a colder box. And if the box keeps drawing heat faster than you replace it, your core temperature begins to drift downward. Slowly, silently. Mild hypothermia begins below 35 degrees Celsius core. Early signs? Shivering, subtle clumsiness, slight confusion, slower thinking. The cruel part, as your brain cools, your awareness declines. You become less able to recognize the danger. This is why hypothermia is called a silent threat. It doesn't shout. It whispers. Now, important clarification. For a healthy adult, dry, well-fed, lightly active, 16 degrees indoors is not immediately life-threatening. Let's be scientifically honest. But risk is not binary, it's conditional. Increase the exposure time, decrease movement, add age, add illness, add fatigue, add poor nutrition, and the margin narrows. Older adults generate less metabolic heat. Children lose heat faster due to surface area ratio. Certain medical conditions blunt the shivering response. The same room becomes a different environment depending on who's inside it. This is why public health authorities in the UK often recommend maintaining indoor temperatures around 18 degrees or higher, particularly for vulnerable groups, because below that threshold, the body's margin for thermal safety shrinks. Not instantly, but steadily. Here's the psychological trap. 16 degrees doesn't trigger fear. It feels survivable, manageable, harmless. But survival science teaches us something profound. Danger is not defined by drama. It's defined by balance. Heat gained versus heat lost. Energy produced versus energy drained. Awareness versus decline. In a blizzard, you fight. In a quiet, cold room, you adapt until adaptation fails. So the real question isn't, can 16 degrees kill you? The real question is, under what conditions does 16 degrees become the tipping point? That is where survival science begins. Not in chaos, but in rooms that feel harmless. And over the next hour, we are going to step inside that room. We will measure the heat. We will measure the risk. We will ask who is most vulnerable. And we will test whether 3 jackets are truly enough. Because survival is rarely about extremes. It's about understanding the edge before you reach it. Stay with me. The temperature is steady. 16 degrees. And your body is already responding. Close your eyes. You are inside a quiet stone cottage somewhere in rural Britain. Outside, the wind moves through bare trees. Inside, the thermometer reads 16 degrees Celsius. It doesn't feel extreme. It doesn't feel deadly. It feels manageable. And that is exactly why it can be dangerous. Your body is engineered to defend a core temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius. Not 36, not 35, 37. The moment your internal temperature drops below 35 degrees Celsius, medicine gives it a name: hypothermia. But here is the question that matters. How cold does the air around you need to be for your core to begin losing that battle? The answer is not as simple as a number, because cold is not an event. Cold is a gradient. At 16 degrees indoors, the air is 21 degrees colder than your body's core. That difference creates a constant, invisible flow of heat from you to the room. Your body loses heat in 4 primary ways: radiation, convection, conduction, evaporation. Even sitting still, your body radiates heat outward like a quiet fireplace. Now imagine this. You sit on a stone floor. Stone absorbs heat far faster than air. Conduction begins stealing warmth directly from your body. There is no drama, no blizzard, just physics. And physics does not negotiate. Medical classification divides hypothermia into stages. Mild hypothermia begins when core temperature falls between 35 and 32 degrees Celsius. Symptoms: shivering, cold, pale skin, reduced coordination. Moderate hypothermia, 32 to 28 degrees Celsius. Confusion begins, speech slows, judgment fades. Below 28 degrees, severe hypothermia. The heart itself becomes unstable. Now pause. Does 16 degrees instantly cause this? No. But here's the science most people misunderstand. Hypothermia risk is not defined only by outdoor freezing temperatures. It is defined by duration of exposure, moisture, wind movement, body fat percentage, age, and metabolic rate. At rest, the average adult produces roughly 70 to 100 watts of metabolic heat. That sounds like a light bulb. But if heat loss exceeds production for hours, the deficit accumulates. In a 16-degree room, especially in old British homes with poor insulation, the body may gradually lose more heat than it generates, particularly in inactivity. Now imagine 6 hours. No movement, minimal food intake. The slow drain begins. You don't collapse dramatically. You simply become slower. And here is the psychological trap. Mild hypothermia reduces awareness. It makes you less likely to recognize the danger. Cold lowers cognitive performance. Reaction time slows. Risk assessment weakens. The colder you become, the less capable you are of noticing it. That is the paradox of dangerous temperature. It is not the cold you fear. It is the cold you underestimate. And at 16 degrees indoors, especially over prolonged periods, the process can begin silently. This is not survival fantasy. This is thermodynamics, and your body is the system under stress. But temperature alone does not decide survival, because the real variable is you. Let us go deeper, because temperature is only the environment. The true battlefield is metabolism. Imagine 2 people in the same 16 degrees Celsius room. One is 25 years old, healthy, well-fed. The other is 72, slightly underweight, sitting still. The air is identical. The outcome is not. As we age, metabolic rate declines, muscle mass decreases, shivering response weakens. Shivering is not discomfort. It is survival. It is rapid muscle contraction generating heat. But if muscle mass is low, heat production capacity drops. Older adults lose heat faster and generate less in return. Now add another variable: moisture. Water conducts heat away from the body up to 25 times faster than air. Even slight dampness in clothing increases heat loss dramatically. This is why sweating inside multiple layers can be dangerous. If you wear 3 heavy jackets but trap moisture, you accelerate cooling. Insulation works by trapping dry air. Wet insulation becomes a heat bridge. Now let's discuss time. At 16 degrees Celsius, a healthy, active adult moving around may remain safe indefinitely, but sit motionless for hours? Metabolic heat production falls. Core temperature begins a slow decline, fractions of a degree at first. You may not notice until shivering begins. And shivering increases energy demand. Without food intake, glycogen stores deplete. Energy drops. Shivering weakens. Heat production decreases. Cooling accelerates. This is the cascade. In the UK, public health guidance often recommends indoor temperatures of at least 18 degrees Celsius for vulnerable individuals. Why? Because below that threshold, statistical risk of cold-related illness increases, especially in older populations. 16 degrees is not a death sentence, but it can become a risk zone under the right conditions. Prolonged inactivity, poor nutrition, damp air, thin body composition, advanced age, and medical conditions. Dangerous temperature is not a single number. It is the point where heat loss consistently exceeds heat production. And once core temperature drops below 35 degrees Celsius, the body enters a survival deficit. Now picture that quiet room again. The thermometer still reads 16 degrees. The air feels calm, but inside the body, a silent negotiation is happening every second. Energy versus environment. Heat versus physics. Survival versus entropy. Cold does not attack you, it waits. And the most dangerous temperature is the one that feels harmless. In the next chapter, we will ask the harder question. Who loses that negotiation first? Because survival science is not about fear. It is about understanding the system. And the system is you. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a stone cottage in northern England. Outside, the wind brushes past hedgerows. Inside, the thermostat reads 16 degrees Celsius. For a healthy young adult, that temperature feels uncomfortable, but manageable. Now replace that person with a 74-year-old man. He is sitting still, reading, not moving much. And this is where survival science begins to whisper. The physiology of aging and cold. As we age, several biological defenses weaken. 1. Reduced metabolic heat production. Basal metabolic rate declines. Muscle mass decreases. Sarcopenia. Less muscle, less heat generation. 2. Blunted vasoconstriction response. Younger bodies constrict blood vessels quickly. Older bodies respond slower. Heat escapes longer before protection activates. 3. Reduced shivering efficiency. Shivering is involuntary muscle contraction. It can increase heat production up to 5 times resting levels. In elderly individuals, this response may be delayed or weaker. Now imagine 6 quiet hours. No dramatic storm, no snow, just 16 degrees Celsius. Core temperature doesn't crash suddenly. It slips from 37 degrees to 36.5 to 36. Mild hypothermia begins below 35 degrees, but danger starts before that. The hidden risk. Reduced cold awareness. Here's something unsettling. Older adults often feel cold less intensely. Thermal perception declines. The warning signal is muted. The body is cooling, but the alarm is softer. In survival terms, that is catastrophic, because hypothermia rarely feels dramatic at first. It feels like fatigue, slight confusion, sleepiness. And sleep in the cold is not rest, it is surrender. UK context. In temperate climates like the UK, indoor temperatures can fluctuate significantly, especially in poorly insulated homes. Public health recommendations commonly suggest indoor temperatures around 18 degrees Celsius for vulnerable groups. Why? Because below that threshold, heat loss can exceed heat production in at-risk individuals, not instantly, but progressively. Survival is often about duration, not drama. But the elderly are not the only ones vulnerable. There's another group, smaller, faster heartbeat, higher surface area relative to body mass, and they lose heat far quicker than adults. In part 2, we step into their world. Picture a child sleeping in that same 16 degrees Celsius room. Soft breathing, small chest rising and falling. Children are not miniature adults. Their thermoregulation is different. The surface area problem. Heat loss depends heavily on surface area. Infants have larger surface area relative to body mass, thinner subcutaneous fat layers, especially newborns, and immature temperature regulation systems. More surface, less insulation, faster heat exchange. Imagine holding a warm mug of tea. Now imagine pouring that tea into a wide, shallow bowl. Which cools faster? The bowl. That is the physics of small bodies. Brown fat, a limited shield. Infants are born with brown adipose tissue. Brown fat can generate heat without shivering. It's an extraordinary evolutionary adaptation. But it has limits. It depletes. It cannot compensate indefinitely in prolonged cold exposure. At 16 degrees Celsius for extended hours, especially overnight, risk increases if clothing is inadequate, bedding is damp, the child is ill or underweight. Behavioral limitation. Adults can add a blanket, make tea, move around. Infants cannot. Their survival depends entirely on environment control. That is why indoor temperature recommendations exist, because unlike adults, children cannot actively defend against cold stress. Subtle signs. Early cold stress in children may appear as cool extremities, irritability, lethargy, pale skin. And again, like in the elderly, the slide is gradual, not dramatic. Survival science teaches us something important. Hypothermia in temperate indoor environments is rarely cinematic. It is quiet, incremental, unnoticed. But age is not the only factor. There is another vulnerability. It hides inside metabolism, inside hormones, inside the bloodstream. In part 3, we enter the invisible battlefield within the body itself. Now imagine a healthy-looking adult, mid-40s, sitting in 16 degrees Celsius, 3 jackets on. Safe? Not necessarily. Metabolic disorders. Conditions that increase risk. Hypothyroidism, reduced thyroid hormone, lower metabolic rate, less internal heat production. Diabetes, impaired circulation, neuropathy, reduced cold detection. Malnutrition, fewer energy reserves, lower thermogenesis capacity. The body is a furnace, but the furnace needs fuel. Without fuel, heat fades. The alcohol illusion. Now let's confront a common myth. Alcohol makes you feel warm. Why? Because it dilates peripheral blood vessels. Warm blood rushes to the skin. You feel heat, but physiologically you are losing it faster. Core temperature drops. Perception lies. Physics does not. In survival science, perception is not protection. The energy equation. Cold survival is a simple but brutal equation. Heat produced versus heat lost. If heat loss exceeds heat production long enough, core temperature falls. Movement increases heat production. Calories fuel metabolism. Dry insulation traps air. Remove one factor, risk rises. Remove two, danger accelerates. Removed three, hypothermia begins. Psychological factor. Cold also impairs cognition. Even mild drops in core temperature can slow reaction time, reduce decision-making ability, and increase confusion. And the colder the brain becomes, the worse decisions it makes, which makes survival even harder. So who is most vulnerable at 16 degrees Celsius indoors? Not everyone, but especially the elderly, infants and children, those with metabolic or circulatory conditions, the malnourished, the intoxicated, the immobile. 16 degrees Celsius is not instantly deadly, but survival science is not about panic. It is about probability, and vulnerability is where probability turns into risk. The illusion of warmth. Close your eyes. You are inside an old stone cottage somewhere in the British countryside. Outside, the wind moves quietly across frozen fields. Inside, the thermometer reads 16 degrees Celsius. It does not feel dramatic. It does not feel deadly. You put on one jacket, then another, then a third. You tell yourself, that should be enough. But survival is not about what feels enough. It is about what physics allows. Your body is a heat engine. At rest, the average adult produces around 70 to 100 watts of metabolic heat. That heat must balance what you lose to the environment. If loss exceeds production, your core temperature begins to fall. Not instantly, not violently, but steadily. There are four silent thieves of heat: conduction, convection, radiation, evaporation. Now imagine this. You are wearing 3 jackets made of cotton and wool. You are sitting still. Your back rests against a stone wall. Beneath you, a wooden chair touches a cold stone floor. The stone absorbs heat continuously through conduction. The air inside the cottage slowly circulates, convection. Your body radiates infrared heat toward colder surfaces. And if your skin is slightly damp from earlier movement, evaporation accelerates the loss. 3 jackets do not stop physics. They only slow it. Here is the scientific reality. Clothing insulation is measured in kilo units. A typical indoor outfit provides about 1 kilo. A heavy winter coat may add 0.7 to 1 kilo. 3 jackets might give you roughly 2 to 3 kilo total if they trap dry air effectively. But here's the catch. Air is the true insulator. Not fabric, not thickness. Air. If layers compress each other, insulation drops. If moisture enters, insulation collapses. Water conducts heat around 25 times faster than air. Now picture this. You walked earlier. Your body warmed. You sweated slightly. You didn't notice. Now you sit still. The moisture trapped between layers begins conducting heat away from your skin. You feel colder than before you put on the 3rd jacket. This is the illusion of warmth. The human body begins mild hypothermia when core temperature falls below 35 degrees Celsius. At first, you shiver. Shivering can increase heat production up to 5 times resting levels. But shivering costs energy. Without food intake, glycogen stores drop. Heat production weakens. Shivering slows. The danger at 16 degrees Celsius indoors is not speed, it is duration. 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours. Especially for an elderly, underweight, ill, or sedentary. 3 jackets cannot replace metabolic heat. They can only preserve what you produce. And if production falls, insulation becomes irrelevant. So ask yourself, are you warm or are you only delaying cold? That is where survival science becomes personal. In part 2, we step deeper into the physiology and discover when 3 jackets truly fail. Hour 1 to 3. The quiet drift. Close your eyes. The room is still. A stone cottage somewhere in rural Britain, the kind you might find near the edges of the moors, where the wind moves before you hear it. The indoor temperature reads 16 degrees Celsius. It does not feel extreme. It feels manageable. An elderly man sits in a wooden chair, 70 years old, light wool jumper, no active heating, no movement beyond the slow rhythm of breathing. This is not a blizzard scenario. This is not a survival show. This is controlled exposure. 6 hours, 16 degrees, 1 human body. Now the science begins. At rest, the average adult produces about 70 to 100 watts of metabolic heat. This is roughly the energy output of a dim light bulb. But heat loss depends on gradient. The human core temperature averages 37 degrees Celsius. The room is 16 degrees Celsius, a 21-degree difference. Heat begins to move outward by radiation, convection, and conduction. At first, nothing dramatic happens. Minute 10. Peripheral vasoconstriction begins. Blood vessels in the hands and feet narrow to preserve core warmth. Fingers feel slightly stiff. Minute 20. Skin temperature drops by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius. The body prioritizes brain and heart. You would not call this danger. You would call this a bit cold. And this is where most people misunderstand cold exposure. Hypothermia does not announce itself with drama. It begins with quiet efficiency. Hour 1. The man shifts slightly. His body is still producing heat, but he is sedentary. No muscular activity means no additional thermogenesis. Shivering has not yet started. Core temperature remains near 36.8 degrees Celsius. Safe. But heat debt is accumulating. The stone floor beneath him is acting as a heat sink. Stone conducts heat away from the body far faster than air. Even without direct contact, radiant loss continues. Humidity matters too. Old air in older UK buildings can carry dampness. Moisture increases thermal conductivity. Even dry clothing loses insulating power over time if ambient humidity rises. Now imagine he stands up. He feels slightly lightheaded, not from fear, but from mild peripheral blood redistribution. Subtle, invisible, scientific. Hour 2. The core temperature may drop to 36.2 to 36.5 degrees in a vulnerable individual. This is still not clinical hypothermia, but performance begins to change. Fine motor skills decline first. He reaches for a mug. His grip is slower. Reaction time lengthens by milliseconds. You cannot feel milliseconds, but they accumulate. Now something critical happens. The body begins non-shivering thermogenesis, metabolic adjustments increasing internal heat production through brown adipose tissue activity. In elderly individuals, this response is reduced. Age matters. Muscle mass matters. Body fat distribution matters. Metabolic rate matters. Cold tolerance is not about toughness, it is about physiology. Hour 3. If no additional insulation, no movement, and no caloric intake occur, core temperature may approach 35.5 to 36 degrees Celsius in susceptible individuals, still above hypothermia threshold, but approaching the boundary. Shivering may begin lightly, small muscle contractions in the shoulders. This is the body's emergency generator switching on. Shivering can increase heat production by 2 to 5 times resting levels, but it requires energy. Glucose is consumed rapidly. In a malnourished or elderly person, reserves are limited. Now the danger becomes metabolic, not environmental. And here is the psychological shift. Cold impairs judgment before it impairs consciousness. The man may feel sleepy, not dramatically, just a desire to rest his eyes. This is not comfort. It is the nervous system conserving energy. And if he sleeps, heat production drops further. Core temperature continues its quiet descent. Pause here. We are only halfway through. The room is still 16 degrees Celsius. No storm, no ice, no cinematic disaster. Only time and biology. Hour 4 to 6. The edge of clinical hypothermia. Hour 4. Core temperature in a vulnerable subject may reach 35 degrees Celsius. This is now mild hypothermia, defined clinically, not dramatically. Shivering intensifies, speech becomes slightly slower, cognitive processing declines. Studies show that even mild core cooling reduces executive function, planning, decision-making, working memory. If he needed to solve a problem right now, he would struggle. Cold narrows the mind. Now imagine this scenario in winter Britain. Heating off, energy costs rising. The room remains at 16 degrees Celsius for days. Cumulative exposure matters more than acute shock. Cold stress becomes chronic. Immune function weakens. Cardiovascular strain increases due to vasoconstriction and elevated blood pressure. For elderly individuals, this can trigger cardiac events. Cold does not need to freeze you to harm you. It only needs to persist. Hour 5. Core temperature may approach 34.5 degrees, below 35 degrees Celsius. Shivering becomes violent. Muscle coordination deteriorates. He tries to stand. Balance falters. Risk of falling increases significantly in cold environments due to neuromuscular impairment. If he falls onto that stone floor, conduction accelerates heat loss dramatically. Surface contact multiplies danger. This is how indoor hypothermia becomes fatal, not through cinematic collapse, but through compounding variables: age, stillness, stone, time. Hour 6. If no intervention occurs, no additional insulation, no warm drink, no movement, core temperature may drop below 35 degrees Celsius in high-risk individuals. Now we are inside the clinical definition. Symptoms may include confusion, slurred speech, paradoxical calmness. This calmness is deceptive. As core temperature falls toward 33 to 34 degrees Celsius, the brain reduces metabolic demand. The person may stop shivering, not because they are warm, but because energy is depleted. This is the most dangerous moment, when the body appears peaceful. Let's correct a myth. Would 3 jackets save him? If dry, properly layered, and combined with insulation from the floor, possibly. If cotton, damp and without movement, unlikely over prolonged exposure. Insulation works by trapping air, but air must remain dry, and the body must continue generating heat. Clothing does not create warmth, metabolism does. Now imagine intervention: a warm drink providing carbohydrates, light movement, a thermal blanket, raising room temperature from 16 degrees Celsius to 18-19 degrees Celsius. Small changes, large physiological impact. 2 degrees can significantly reduce thermal gradient and heat loss rate. This is the science of survival, not heroics. Margins. So, can 16 degrees indoors cause hypothermia in the UK? For a healthy young adult moving actively, unlikely in short durations. For an elderly, sedentary individual over prolonged hours or days, yes. Under the right conditions, absolutely. Not instantly, not dramatically, but progressively, quietly, biologically. And that is the lesson of this simulation. Survival is not about surviving extremes. It is about understanding thresholds. 16 degrees is not deadly, but 6 hours, low metabolism, damp air, and stillness, that can be. The forest outside remains silent. The stone walls hold their cold. The difference between safety and danger was never the temperature alone. It was time and physiology. Hour 1 to 3. The quiet drift. Close your eyes. The room is still. A stone cottage somewhere in rural Britain, the kind you might find near the edges of the moors, where the wind moves before you hear it. The indoor temperature reads 16 degrees Celsius. It does not feel extreme. It feels manageable. An elderly man sits in a wooden chair, 70 years old, light wool jumper, no active heating, no movement beyond the slow rhythm of breathing. This is not a blizzard scenario. This is not a survival show. This is controlled exposure. 6 hours, 16 degrees, one human body. Now the science begins. At rest, the average adult produces about 70 to 100 watts of metabolic heat. This is roughly the energy output of a dim light bulb. But heat loss depends on gradient. The human core temperature averages 37 degrees Celsius. The room is 16 degrees Celsius, a 21-degree difference. Heat begins to move outward by radiation, convection, and conduction. At first, nothing dramatic happens. Minute 10. Peripheral vasoconstriction begins. Blood vessels in the hands and feet narrow to preserve core warmth. Fingers feel slightly stiff. Minute 20. Skin temperature drops by 1 to 2 degrees Celsius. The body prioritizes brain and heart. You would not call this danger. You would call this a bit cold. And this is where most people misunderstand cold exposure. Hypothermia does not announce itself with drama. It begins with quiet efficiency. Hour 1. The man shifts slightly. His body is still producing heat, but he is sedentary. No muscular activity means no additional thermogenesis. Shivering has not yet started. Core temperature remains near 36.8 degrees Celsius. Safe. But heat debt is accumulating. The stone floor beneath him is acting as a heat sink. Stone conducts heat away from the body far faster than air. Even without direct contact, radiant loss continues. Humidity matters too. Old air in older UK buildings can carry dampness. Moisture increases thermal conductivity. Even dry clothing loses insulating power over time if ambient humidity rises. Now imagine he stands up. He feels slightly lightheaded, not from fear, but from mild peripheral blood redistribution. Subtle, invisible, scientific. Hour 2. The core temperature may drop to 36.2 to 36.5 degrees in a vulnerable individual. This is still not clinical hypothermia, but performance begins to change. Fine motor skills decline first. He reaches for a mug. His grip is slower. Reaction time lengthens by milliseconds. You cannot feel milliseconds, but they accumulate. Now something critical happens. The body begins non-shivering thermogenesis, metabolic adjustments increasing internal heat production through brown adipose tissue activity. In elderly individuals, this response is reduced. Age matters. Muscle mass matters. Body fat distribution matters. Metabolic rate matters. Cold tolerance is not about toughness. It is about physiology. Hour 3. If no additional insulation, no movement, and no caloric intake occur, core temperature may approach 35.5 to 36 degrees Celsius in susceptible individuals, still above hypothermia threshold, but approaching the boundary. Shivering may begin lightly, small muscle contractions in the shoulders. This is the body's emergency generator switching on. Shivering can increase heat production by 2 to 5 times resting levels, but it requires energy. Glucose is consumed rapidly. In a malnourished or elderly person, reserves are limited. Now the danger becomes metabolic, not environmental. And here is the psychological shift. Cold impairs judgment before it impairs consciousness. The man may feel sleepy, not dramatically, just a desire to rest his eyes. This is not comfort. It is the nervous system conserving energy. And if he sleeps, heat production drops further. Core temperature continues its quiet descent. Pause here. We are only halfway through. The room is still 16 degrees Celsius. No storm, no ice, no cinematic disaster. Only time and biology. The room is still 16 degrees Celsius, but now imagine someone else sitting there. An elderly man, 72 years old. He does not shiver much anymore. Aging reduces the shivering response. Metabolic rate declines. Peripheral circulation weakens. He feels a bit chilly, but not in danger. And this is why prevention must be personal. 1. Who is most vulnerable? Infants lose heat faster due to higher surface area to mass ratio. Older adults generate less heat and sense cold less effectively. People with hypothyroidism produce less metabolic heat. Individuals with diabetes may have impaired circulation. Alcohol reduces core heat retention by causing vasodilation, warm feeling, colder core. Cold stress increases cardiovascular strain. Heart rate rises, blood pressure increases. For those with heart conditions, this matters. Cold is not just discomfort, it is workload. 2. Early warning signs before hypothermia. You feel clumsy. You drop objects. Speech slows. You misjudge time. You feel sleepy. This is the dangerous moment, because the brain, when cooling, reduces awareness. Hypothermia impairs judgment, which means you may not recognize you are in danger. That is why prevention must be proactive, not reactive. 3. Nutrition and energy. Heat production requires fuel. In cold conditions, caloric needs increase. Carbohydrates provide quick metabolic heat. Warm drinks help psychologically and physically, but avoid alcohol. Hydration matters. Even mild dehydration reduces circulatory efficiency. Warmth is chemistry. 4. Movement as medicine. Light activity increases metabolic heat. Standing, stretching, walking slowly. Just 10 minutes of movement can significantly increase heat production, but balance is critical. Sweating is dangerous. Sweat cools the body through evaporation, so move gently. Generate warmth without moisture. 5. The psychological edge. Cold erodes morale. When morale drops, movement stops. When movement stops, heat drops. Survival is partly emotional regulation. Calm mind, measured actions, intentional warmth. This is not about fear of 16 degrees Celsius. It is about respecting it. Now return to the room one last time. The thermometer glows softly. It reads 18 degrees Celsius. Layers are correct. Floor insulated. Air still. Body nourished. You are not fighting the cold anymore. You are managing it. And that's the difference between exposure and survival. Final truth. Can 16 degrees indoors cause hypothermia in the UK? For a healthy, active adult, rarely, and usually only with prolonged exposure and additional risk factors. But for the vulnerable, for the isolated, for the undernourished, yes, it can contribute. Cold does not need to be extreme. It only needs time. And prevention removes time from the equation. Because survival is not about enduring the worst. It is about understanding the smallest risks before they grow. And science, quiet science, is warmer than ignorance. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a stone cottage somewhere in the British countryside. No snowstorm, no howling blizzard, just a still winter evening. The thermometer on the wall reads 16 degrees Celsius. Not freezing, not dramatic, just cold. Now here is the truth most people don't realize. Hypothermia does not begin with chaos. It begins with quiet. Your body was built to protect one number above all others, 37 degrees Celsius. That is your core temperature, the temperature at which your enzymes function optimally, at which your brain processes clearly, at which your heart rhythm remains stable. When that core temperature drops below 35 degrees Celsius, the medical definition of hypothermia begins, and it does not require Arctic conditions. At 16 degrees Celsius indoors, your body immediately begins adjusting. Blood vessels in your skin constrict. This is called peripheral vasoconstriction. Less blood flows to your hands, your feet, your ears. Why? Because your body is prioritizing your vital organs, brain, heart, lungs. You may not even notice it at first. You just feel slightly cold. You pull your sleeves down. You sit still. And that is where survival becomes science. Heat leaves your body in 4 ways. Conduction, through contact with cold surfaces. Convection, through moving air. Radiation, natural heat transfer to cooler surroundings. Evaporation, especially if your skin or clothes are damp. In a 16 degrees Celsius room with stone floors and minimal insulation, conditions not uncommon in older UK homes, conduction becomes powerful. Sit on a cold surface long enough and heat drains steadily from your body, not violently, but constantly. Now imagine an elderly person, metabolic rate slightly lower, muscle mass reduced, shivering response weaker. They are reading quietly in that same 16 degrees Celsius room. Hours pass. Their body produces less metabolic heat than a younger adult would. Gradually, their core temperature may begin to drift downward, perhaps not into severe hypothermia, but into mild cold stress. Shivering starts subtly, then fatigue, then slower thinking. Here is the danger. Mild hypothermia feels like tiredness. It feels like sleepiness. It feels like I'll just rest for a moment. And that is why cold is deceptive. Let's talk about the number people always ask. Is 16 degrees itself dangerous? On its own, for a healthy, active adult, dry, moving, and properly clothed, it is usually tolerable for limited periods. But survival is never about one variable. It is about the combination: temperature, time, moisture, age, health, and nutrition. Remove one layer of protection, and risk increases. Add damp clothing, risk increases. Stay immobile for hours, risk increases. Consume alcohol, risk increases, because alcohol causes vasodilation. You feel warmer, but your body loses heat faster. Comfort becomes illusion. Now picture another scenario. Same 16 degrees Celsius room, but the person is slightly dehydrated. They haven't eaten enough calories that day. Your body needs fuel to generate heat. Thermogenesis requires energy. Without adequate glucose and fat metabolism, heat production drops. Cold tolerance falls. This is not drama. This is physiology. Let's go deeper. When core temperature falls below 35 degrees Celsius even slightly, cognitive function begins to decline. Reaction time slows. Judgment becomes impaired. Memory falters. In moderate hypothermia, below 32 degrees Celsius, confusion becomes obvious. Speech slurs. Coordination collapses. But most indoor cold exposures never reach dramatic levels. Instead, they hover in the gray zone of chronic cold stress. And chronic cold stress has been associated with increased cardiovascular strain. Blood pressure rises due to vasoconstriction. Heart workload increases. For vulnerable individuals, especially older adults, this matters. A quiet 16 degrees Celsius room can increase cardiac stress over prolonged exposure, not instantly, but biologically. Now let's answer the practical question: are 3 jackets enough? The answer depends on structure. Layering works because trapped air is insulation, but if moisture accumulates from sweat or damp air, insulation collapses. Water conducts heat approximately 25 times faster than air. So 3 heavy cotton layers, slightly damp, may perform worse than 2 dry thermal layers designed for insulation. In survival science, dryness is protection, air is protection, movement is protection. Think again about that quiet cottage. The light fades, the room grows darker, the body grows slower. Cold is not an attack, it is subtraction. It subtracts heat, then energy, then clarity. But here is the empowering truth. Cold is predictable, and what is predictable is survivable. In the UK, public health guidance often suggests maintaining indoor temperatures around 18 degrees Celsius for vulnerable individuals. That 2-degree difference between 16 and 18 degrees Celsius may sound trivial, but physiologically it reduces thermal gradient stress. It reduces energy expenditure for heat production. It reduces strain. In survival science, small margins matter. 2 degrees can be the difference between steady balance and gradual decline. Now, imagine you're sitting in that 16 degrees Celsius room. You become aware. You stand up. You move. Muscle contraction generates heat. You add a dry insulating layer. You drink something warm. You eat. Your metabolic furnace reignites within minutes. Peripheral warmth returns. Clarity sharpens. Because survival is not about resisting cold with willpower, it is about responding with understanding. Hypothermia is rarely cinematic indoors. It does not always look like frostbite and snow. Sometimes it looks like an elderly person falling asleep in a cold living room. Sometimes it looks like someone underestimating how long they have been sitting still. Sometimes it looks like, I'm fine, until they are not. But here is the final truth. 16 degrees Celsius indoors does not automatically cause hypothermia. It creates a condition where risk can increase depending on vulnerability and exposure time. Healthy, active adults with adequate clothing and nutrition can tolerate it for extended periods. Elderly individuals, infants, and those with medical conditions face higher risk. Science does not exaggerate. It measures, and measurement gives you power. So, the next time you see 16 degrees Celsius on a thermostat, do not panic, but do not dismiss it either. Ask, who is in this room? How long will they remain still? Are they dry? Have they eaten? Are they medically vulnerable? Survival begins with awareness. The forest does not hate you. The cold room does not hate you. They follow physics. Your body follows biology. When physics meets biology, survival becomes science, and science gives you control. Because in the end, survival is not about enduring extreme moments. It's about respecting small ones. 16 degrees, quiet air, a still evening, a body that whispers before it fails. Listen early, adjust early, act early, and you will never have to fight the cold. You will simply understand it. Survival is not fear, it is knowledge applied in time. And now you know.
Don't forget to support Biopedia Fact Check. Subscribe now and stay curious with science-backed truths.